So I'm quite wrong, and I've started very badly. It's lovely to be here, Greg. Comedy is all about the problems, the problem material, the ambiguities, the inconsistencies, the grubby behaviors that we would rather not admit to. And in climate, there's hundreds and hundreds of all of those. Not only is there the big problem, how do we save the planet? How do we deal with the climate emergency? But also all of these myriad, everything else bubbles off into these glorious problems. How do we talk about it? How do we bring it up without sounding like a boring wanker? I should have checked if I could say that on your podcast. Just like a business leader, the comedian is the most powerful person in the room and the most vulnerable person in the room.
Yes. Hi, and welcome to Meta-Conscious Leaders. On this podcast, we talk about things that matter and address important questions such as, who am I? Why am I here? And what should I be doing? These can be quite lofty questions, quite serious, and we can get a little heavy at times seeking answers to these questions. And so today, with a view on the festive season and looking to understand what a lighter approach might reveal for us, I'm joined by a unique comedian. Now, I do understand that if one is brave enough, naive enough, or silly enough, or maybe even wise enough to invite a comedian to come on as a guest, one needs to be ready to join in a high wire act. So here we go. Buckle up and let me introduce you to the one and only climate comedian, Stuart Goldsmith. Welcome, Stuart. I'm glad you're here with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Greg. Modesty prevents me from telling you that you cannot buckle up for a high wire act. Although, actually, no, do you know what? I'm an idiot now because you can. I used to be a circus performer a million years ago, a sort of circus performer. I was a street performer at Covent Garden. And I believe I'm right in saying, actually, if you're doing a high enough high wire act, they do page in a safety harness. So I'm quite wrong, and I've started very badly. It's lovely to be here, Greg.
That's when you don't have a safety net, presumably.
Yes, I think they do both. I think the rule in that kind of stuff is no permanent damage. So anything that you could do to make it a bit more, a bit safer, because I remember this from a speed awareness course. Have you ever speeded and sped and got sent on a speed awareness course?
How could I possibly admit to that? Maybe, maybe not.
Well, this is the lovely thing about comedy. I can admit to it. I've been on two, and I kind of enjoyed both of them, I have to say. They were quite fun. But one of them, I think of this daily, that one of them, the guy said, well, if you don't drive in a safe and responsible manner, you're relying on your luck. And what happens to luck? And we all went, and he went, it runs out. And I think of that all the time. I'm quite a crisis-oriented person. So I'm always trying to optimize for what happens if my luck runs out. Yeah, so we'll buckle up together.
So this high wire act that you've chosen in life, we all express ourselves in different ways, don't we? We come into this world, we get involved in charity or music or business, but you've chosen comedy as your route of expression.
I remember hearing a comedian years ago, a sort of long in the tooth sort of comedy warrior, road warrior, many years ago. Someone said to him, why did you choose comedy? And he said, you should be asking, why did comedy choose me? And at the time, I thought that was the most, not pretentious exactly, but it was like, come on, mate, stop believing in your own hype. But I think as I've got older, I really don't think that I chose comedy. I really think that it was sort of inescapable. It doesn't feel like a conscious choice so much as the removing of hurdles between me and actually what I really wanted to do. I think I've tried to live my life to the edict, what would I do if I could do anything at all? And for a little while, I thought I wanted to be an actor, but I actually just wanted to feel special. So the day when I admitted to myself, oh, I don't want to play Hamlet, I just want to be able to tell people I've played Hamlet. That was quite a big moment of really sort of being a bit forensically honest with myself. I was quite a starry-eyed kid, sort of seduced by the sentimentality and the romance of, street performing and performance and stuff like this. But really, all I wanted to do was make people laugh. I love laughter. I think it is the most innocent and the most joyful kind of action. And it's free. When if I'm feeling down after a bad gig and I'm trying to deal with my own imposter syndrome, which a lot of us will suffer from, I'm sure your listeners may suffer from that as well, I can honestly say that I can say to myself, well, look, whether or not tonight went well or badly, if I think of the joke about the three beekeepers in the bar, just old pub jokes, the joke about the bloke with the huge orange head, they just make me laugh and they're free. And I just think, that is the most, it's almost religious. It's like the notion of laughter being out there and accessible, it just sustains me. And it just feels like this is a beautiful and unique and wonderful thing. Why wouldn't I want to serve that?
So why climate change? Why do you pick on climate change to make a joke of? Because it's not a joke.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not a joke. And there's a big answer to this. And I'll try to give you the bullet points, the big answer, and you can pick which ones you'd like to expand on. But as you might already have noticed, I'm not a very bullet point sort of person. I'll do my best. So I would say that I'm not making a joke of climate change. I'm making lots and lots of jokes about how we communicate climate change.
Okay.
Comedy is all about the problems. The problems are the material, the ambiguities, the inconsistencies, the grubby behaviors that we would rather not admit to. And in climate, there's hundreds and hundreds of all of those. Not only is there the big problem, how do we save the planet? How do we deal with the climate emergency? But also all of these myriad, everything else bubbles off into these glorious problems. How do we talk about it? How do we bring it up without sounding like a boring wanker? I should have checked if I could say that on your podcast. You could always bleep it if you have to. But how do we get over the sort of branding problem that climate people have? How do we talk to our children about the climate? How do we process our own emotions? How do we not just remain completely inert and terrified? All of these problems are things that you can make jokes about. In terms of my own kind of passage into it, I got to a stage with stand-up where I don't say this on a lot of podcasts, but I'm going to be honest because I don't understand what metaconscious means, so I'm going to take multiple stabs at it. I'm going to be as honest as I can. I was pretty bored of stand-up comedy. I love it, but I'm an ADHD person and I need novelty. I need new things all the time. And stand-up had begun to feel like a bit of a routine. They call it a comedy circuit. It's a circuit for a reason. The hoary old comedians will say. So I was a bit bored of it and I was a bit looking for the next thing. At the same time, I was experiencing a lot of climate dread. I think the pandemic jangled a lot of my sort of traumatic jangle spider sense. And I was feeling very jangled and the climate was creeping in more and more. And I don't know, we can maybe talk about this more. I don't know whether this is true for a lot of people, but the way that I saw the pandemic creep towards the front pages, I remember almost in like December 2019, I was seeing this thing called coronavirus just get slightly closer and closer to the front page. And I thought this could be the one. And lo and behold, it was the one. I think that I'm seeing the climate crisis creep closer to the front pages. That seems a bit more real than I'd possibly allowed myself to think. So I was feeling lots and lots of dread. And what I really feel looking back, I think what happened is that the two challenges, bit cheesed off with comedy and very, very dreading, feeling very depressed and scared about the climate crisis, those problems seem to address each other, not to solve them, but suddenly I wanted to talk about on stage. I wanted to talk about what was going on in my mind, in my heart. And having that new challenge of how fiendishly difficult it is to make jokes about the climate crisis, that challenge seemed to resolve the boredness, and talking about it on stage helped me process the dread. And I've become completely addicted to it. And now it's all I want to. I did some gigs over the weekend years ago as I drove between Falmouth and Lyme Regis doing these shows. I would have thought I would have been listening to a pop culture podcast or something, or I've been staring out the window thinking I should be using this term to learn Chinese, and I'm never getting around to it. But now I devoured the Overshoot podcast, 5 episodes, absolutely brilliant. I got stuck into something called The Great Simplification, which is talking about AI and climate impacts. All I want to do is hoover up this information and try and use myself as a prism to refract scary and complicated information out into funny, colourful stuff that people can understand more about.
So you're a therapist or an alchemist?
I'd love to be either, but I don't have the A-levels.
Or both?
I'd love to be either. They sound great. I'm often in my own podcast. Sorry, you've got a question coming.
So what I'm thinking there, Stuart, is you make people laugh. All right, that's therapy. It's laughter. It's therapy. It's about a serious issue. So in a way, we get softened up, and then the alchemy is by dealing with some really serious issues within that sort of comfort zone of humor, some truths are able to sink through.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. I would say that comedy certainly has a therapeutic effect. Therapy is a real thing that should be practiced by trained people. I'm not one of them. And I'm often accused in a friendly way of being my own podcast. I've interviewed over 500 comics about their creative process in my podcast, The Comedian's Comedian. Been doing that for about 13 years. And I'm often jokingly accused of being an untrained man attempting therapy with no regard for the consequences. But really, it's just me trying to say to comedians who are often very articulate people who have a really interesting way of processing their emotions, saying to them, you think you're like this. Are you perhaps like this? Or I see this in your work. Do you see it as well? It's that kind of a show. So it does have a therapeutic element to it, but I'm absolutely not a therapist. And I think I have to try and maintain and promote a real respect for doing the actual training. Having said that, comedy for sure has a therapeutic effect. Who hasn't felt better for laughing? Who hasn't felt better for sharing a connection and going, wow, other people think this way too? And dealing with problems in your life by saying, oh my God, I'm completely overwhelmed with this. And then someone else, whether it's one person in a conversation or 500 people at a gig, they laugh and go, God, me too. How can that not be therapeutic for everybody? In terms of the alchemy, it does feel a little bit magic when you turn something negative into something positive. When you share a problem, it's not just halved, it's split between hundreds of people, and we all contribute to it and we laugh and we all feel better afterwards. For me, there is always a sort of a secondary question to that, which is, will I do this work just so that people feel better? Or is there a relationship between feeling better and taking better actions, making better decisions, feeling more coherent? There are more of us. Say again, sorry?
And that's important for you?
That is important to me. I do want to be useful. I was talking to someone recently about the reason Douglas Adams never enjoyed stand-up comedy. Douglas Adams, hilarious writer, brilliant man. He said, I read this in maybe his biography. He said he didn't like stand-up comedy because years ago he went to a comedy club, and this would have been, I imagine, in the sort of mid to late 80s. And someone was on stage saying, it's a kind of a well-worn comic trope. The what's it called? The black box in an aeroplane that records, the black box flight recorder.
Yep.
It's completely indestructible. And the comedian was saying, why don't they just make the whole plane out of that material? And And Douglas Adams was going, well, that's stupid because it would be too heavy. It couldn't take off. Do you know what I mean? So what that means to me is that we can all make jokes, that the easiest joke to make about the climate is, ha ha ha, we're all screwed. Or here's a climate fact and here's a knob joke on the end of it.
Yeah.
But so what? I would like to do jokes that, funnily enough, I'd like to do jokes that Douglas Adams would have enjoyed, jokes that are meaningful, that are sufficiently well researched, that they mean something and there's a point to them. And so we laugh and feel good, and then we are either a bit more informed or we feel something positive about our ability to take action.
So tell me about what you do with companies. You go and visit them and make them laugh about all the terrible things that they do, or do you?
No, well, I do have to be careful in the work that I do for companies. I do have to be careful that I'm not being used for greenwash. The way I got into working with companies was that I had lots of listeners to my podcast approach me variously through, emails and letters and so on, and say, you've got to share some of this stuff. I had a gentleman who was a hostage negotiator who got in touch and said, your podcast about comedy is really useful for my work as a hostage negotiator. And I was like, what? So I had so many people say, you've got to share this stuff. I wrote a talk, like a sort of 45 to an hour talk about resilience from the perspective of comedians, how comedians cope with having a bad gig and getting up and wanting to, sort of nurturing the desire to want to get back on stage despite how bad you feel. And I gave that to talk to companies, and I still do that. And I think it was then really that I, as a very alternative leaning person, like I went to a school that I hated and I felt very boxed in, and I wanted this sort of alternate, watching the young ones on TV as a kid going, oh, the alternative comedy, the alternative. I think that I realized doing those resilience talks that I'd always thought there was cool alternative people and business people. And then doing those talks, I'd go in, I'd go, these business people are young and not necessarily wearing suit and ties. Oh, they're all ages, but they're exciting. They're passionate about their work. So then when I started to make the climate comedy, I thought to myself, probably there is an equivalent audience of scared people, such as I would find in a comedy club. Probably there are people who are working in a sustainability department of a big company who are feeling completely burnt out and wobbly about all this sort of stuff. And one way or another, I ended up meeting and working for those sorts of people. So my favorite shows to do for businesses, and I do all sorts. I've done, in the last month, I've done something for the Crown Estate for their Sustainability Strategy Day. I've done something for the Railway Standards and Safety Board. They were genuinely a hoot. I was expecting train spotters. I've done something for the International Federation Forum that worked with the Olympic Committee. And all of these rooms are, they're people who are passionate about sustainability, or I'm being booked by people who are passionate about sustainability, who want to engage their team members so that they're equally passionate. And my favorite ones to do are ones where I can tell that I am making the, Sustainability Strategy Day feel less like a health and safety briefing where everyone just nods and blinks and smiles and waits for it to be over, and more like something real and vital and something they should all be caring passionately about. Not because someone's wagging their finger and saying, you should all care passionately about this, but because I'm helping them to connect with their actual passion about it.
Well, you have a number of business people who are watching at the moment, business leaders and people who occupy those roles that you've just been describing. What would you say to them now?
I'm very pleased to hear it.
Because what would you be saying to them now?
What would I be saying to them now? In what context? What's the weighting of that question?
Well, in that, how do they give this a lighter approach, other than inviting in your good self to get? How can this be brought forward within a company, even within a board, within a small group, within a team, and then to a wider audience within the company, and then also to a wider audience still, to suppliers and so forth? Because, as you say, if you can bring a little bit of humor into it, or if you can sort of bring that in to lighten it up a little bit, then the communication rolls much more easily.
Yes. I think that there are several pillars to my answer to that question. And there are several pillars to what we can learn from comedians and comedy, and what we can learn from what I think I can share, insights I can share from my work as to how to talk to an audience about the climate, whether that audience is co-members of a board or team members or employees or whatever. I've done so many different gigs in so many different types of situations where I have been on a Friday night. I've been headlining a Friday night comedy club at the Chuckle Hut or whatever, and they simply do not want to hear about the climate crisis. And I've had to learn how to get the message across regardless. So there are a handful of insights I can share about how we name the elephant in the room. One of the things I noticed when I was doing the resilience work, I would always do these briefings with people where I'd say, okay, I'm going to come in and do this session. I can tailor it accordingly to your needs and your sort of messaging. We'd have a briefing call. And I don't know if it's because I'm from the outside. I've never had a real job. I've never had a salary. So whether it's because I'm from outside business, or I'm a comedian, or I'm a practiced interviewer, but these people would open up. And the trick was to only get one of them on their own at a time. If two people joined the briefing, it was much harder. But I'd say, okay, so we're doing this, and they'd say, yes, when you say this, we need to say this. And I'd go, got it. And what's really going on? And they'd go, well, what it is we've just been acquired by a billionaire and no one, you know what I mean? You can't tell him anything and we're all panicking. And I'd go, great. So I would then know that I'm not going to say that out loud, but I know what the actual problem is. And it strikes me that so much of employee engagement is trying to understand what the actual problem is. It's almost like that's the biggest problem. All of the levels at which, we can't say this, but everyone knows this. Well, if you can't say the thing that everyone knows, how are they going to invest in you? How are they going to trust you? The magical skill that comedy has is you can name the elephant in the room, but without needing to be, I've just mixed a metaphor there. I don't think anyone needs to name the elephant in the room. You can identify the elephant in the room, name it if you wish. Without needing to be a stand-up comedian, I think a lot of internal communications can really come down to finding a way to be honest, finding a way to say, listen, we know that you all think this. We know that you all think this. People shy away from the truth. They go, we mustn't say that because they might, we don't want to scare everyone. Yeah. If you can say to people, we know that you're scared about losing all your jobs, we get it. Then suddenly you're having a real conversation with them rather than this sort of, it's not fraudulent, it's understandable. But if everything is sort of stagey and caged and sort of the official mandated company line, then
Yeah.
how can you relate to your
Yeah.
audience as people? So I think that's just sort of one example really of how you need to position the message such that your audience will trust you.
Yeah. My a favorite question of mine when, and this quite often happens, I have somebody saying, this is the situation and this is the problem and he's this and she's that and, blah, blah, blah. What should I do? Or something along those lines. And I said, well, what would happen if you told the truth? If you were honest about it and simply said what you think, what would that
Yeah.
look like? How
Yeah.
would they respond? Yeah, just as a thought experiment. Because once one runs the thought experiment, the outcomes are not what one kind of fears that they might be before you thought about it.
Yes. Yes. There's I understand that there is this sort of feeling of like, oh well, God, I can't tell the truth. I can't say that. Do you know what I mean? Because that
Yeah.
would expose me. It would make me vulnerable. What if there
Yeah.
are, and I understand those. I don't advocate for simply everyone going, right, here's the unvarnished truth and bang, and you create this sort of awful company culture where people are saying, well, I truly despise this person, But I do think that there are ways to communicate honestly. One of the things that happens a lot in stand-up is that the more specific you are, the more universal you become. And that's a crazy thing to think about. What's a good example? The only example I can come to is sort of awful, but I'll share it with you anyway. If I say to an audience, God, parenting's hard. Well, yeah, it's true. Sure, that's true. We all get it. And parenting's hard, but so what? It's bland. It appeals to every parent, but it's bland.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I say, the other day, I looked at my children and I thought to myself, you have stolen from me even the luxury of suicide, right? That's an extreme example and one that I wouldn't use in a corporate context. But parents in the room will explode because they get it. They're like, oh God, that's how it feels. The more specific you get, and it comes with risk and it comes with vulnerability, but you make this authentic connection with your audience because you have said a thing that they're all thinking. And by doing so, it costs you something. There's a brilliant sci-fi comic book series I read where one of the factions in it, they use magic. It's like the magic people versus the science people. And one of the costs of the magic, magic spells, you don't just say some words and a thing happens.
Yeah.
You have to share a secret. You have to say something
Okay.
out loud that you'd rather not say.
Yeah.
And there's this wonderful scene where two characters, they're about to get blown up or something, and they need a teleporter. And one of them looks at their partner, that's the other character, and says, I've been cheating on you for the last 2 years. And they're like, oh no, but it opens the cost opens the teleport thing and they get away. So the cost of an authentic connection is often a risk and a vulnerability. But that connection that it makes is so powerful.
What challenges do you think companies have in terms of addressing the climate? Comedy is a serious business as well as being a funny one. And so much of what you're talking about when you're talking about comedian and being a comedian is so relevant to business. You talk about comedy and it's like, well, that's business. I mean,
Yes.
the problem that the gold is in the problem, or is in the detail. That's business. Everything sort of relates across. So I really think that there's a mirror here, which is a wonderful mirror to have.
Well, the starting point, just to interrupt, the starting point of the resilience sessions that I offer the starting point is that just like a business leader, the comedian is the most powerful person in the room and the most vulnerable person in the room.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? There's so many parallels. And I only know these because business people got in touch and kept saying, that's a parallel. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes.
So starting from that and talking about how resilience for a comedian is something that's learned. It's not something we're born with, and because I've interviewed all these people, I can say, this is how Jimmy Carr deals with having a panic attack on stage in front of 20,000 people because I asked him about it. This is how Sarah Millican, these are sort of UK examples. This is how Sarah Millican deals with seeing someone in an audience who's staring at her and not smiling. And those are very human things. What does it mean?
Yeah.
How can we avoid racing ahead and assuming that everyone who's looking at their watch is bored and therefore they hate me and I'm a terrible person? Yeah. How do we deal with imposter syndrome? How do we remember our values when we've made a huge mistake and we feel terrible about it and all we want to do is ruminate on how terrible we are? All of those things absolutely have parallels from a comedian perspective. Yeah.
So business is a bit of a hoot, really. I mean, I sometimes think that one visited here from Mars, and actually Mars is probably too close because that's already got through the Musk effect is kind of getting probably advanced knowledge of what's going on in business. So go from another galaxy or certainly another solar system. If you were to come to Earth and look at what was going on, you'd see all these people milling around, and then you'd see these business people. Reminds me of that joke. I'm a Catholic. It reminds me of that joke where somebody's being shown around heaven by St. Peter, and they come up against this big wall, and there's lots of noise and buzz going on the other side. And the soul who's just departed says to him, "What's over there?" And he says, "Oh, shh, that's the Catholics. They think they're the only ones here." And it's a bit like business. It's like in business, we think that's all there is to the world, to life, to reality. Let's just get on with the business. It's all about the bottom line. But it's not, is it?
Well, as I said, I have not been in business, and my reflections on this will be from the perspective of someone looking over that wall and seeing the people. Don't tell them. They think this is all there is. I think that I'll talk in a sort of in a comedy parallel. It is very easy as a comedian to optimize. It's not easy, it's difficult, but it's attractive to optimize for a certain sort of thing, for a certain outcome. Maybe you want to be able to play. This is a thing that people say in the first few years of comedy. You've got to be able to play every room. I remember Eddie Izzard used to have a huge poster on their wall that was, they'd put a pin into the poster whenever they'd smashed a room, and the object was to fill up the whole of the British Isles with pins in the poster. You can optimize for being able to play anywhere. You can optimize for a certain sort of outcome. You can say, I want to be able to absolutely destroy the Manchester Comedy Store on a Saturday night, or up the creek in Deptford, big sort of difficult rooms to play, and win them over. Or you can optimize for the sort of work that says, no, I want to give an audience something, not what they want, but what they don't know they want. Or I'm going to optimize for something brand new every single time. Think of Ross Noble. If a bit works, he takes it to pieces the next night. Like it's all improvised. There's so many different things that you can optimize for. And it can be difficult you can end up sort of not being able to see the wood for the trees. And I'm sure with business people, you might end up going, I'm optimizing for profit. I'm optimizing for growth or expansion or these sorts of things. And then you can look around, I imagine, years later and go, I really focused on this. And on the way, I missed lots of other possibilities. I mean, the cliched one, and you tell me if this is as true as I think it is, the cliched one would be the amount of business people in their 50s who think, well, if I had my time over, I'd have spent more time with my kids. Because actually, it's so easy to get swept up in how relentless it is and how fast you need to run to keep up. That you actually end up missing out on the most important time of your life. I stopped me in my tracks. I'm a father of two, and I remember hearing a couple of years ago, I've always optimized for spending as much time with my children as I possibly can. But someone said, it's funny, isn't it, how for most of your children's lives, and like for most of your life and your relationship with your children, they'll be adults. And I was like, oh my God, they will. They'll most of the time I know them and we're in the same space together. Most of that time they'll be adults. Doesn't that emphasize how precious these young years are with, kids under 10?
Yeah.
So I think that you don't want to miss the wood for the trees. And I can see how that is. I mean, in some ways, and this is one of those things, like I said before, I need to be careful that I'm not being used as greenwashing. I don't think I have. And there is an argument that, I've never taken a gig for Shell or a fossil fuel company, but there is an argument that I should do that gig because they need to hear the stuff more than anyone. I would probably ethically launder the money and give it to, medical aid for Palestine or something. But I think that one of the other things I need to look out for is the fact that someone said to me recently, the HR branch, the HR department of a big organization, they're not there really to protect the employees. They're there to protect the company. And someone said, well, here's a perspective on corporate sustainability. Are they there to protect the planet? No, they're there to protect the company. They're to make sure the company doesn't break the rules. They're there to manage risk, reputational risk and legal risks and stuff. So I think that one of the things I have to watch out for as I optimize for going into businesses and making it all feel real is that I've got to make decisions about who I work with and whether I think that our goals are aligned and are they being used by do you know what I mean? There's a kind of a nested effect. All I can do is try very hard to make the right decisions and tell the right jokes in front of the right people.
And move the dial.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have if I perform this as a joke, it'll kill it stone dead. But the thrust of a joke that I have is that I see my role is to meet everyone where they're at and bump them one stage forward. So I say, if you're complacent, I think you should be concerned. If you're concerned, I think you should be alarmed. If you're alarmed, I think you should take some concrete action. The joke on the end is there is a risk that if you're already taking action, you see my act and I bump you all the way back round to complacent. That's happened to me. I've been feeling very activated. Then I've seen someone else glue themselves to the road and I've thought, no, it's fine. They've got this. So, I absolutely operate within that dynamic, I think.
Yeah, but I'm sure that as you're bumping people along, you're also putting a smile on their face.
Well, this is it. I think comedy is like social lubricant. It's so different to be told some information than to learn something, because there's a brilliant comic called Ahir Shah, again, a British example, very, very funny guy, multiple award winner. He said jokes are like zip files. It's like information in a zip file. The joke transmits it to the audience and the audience unzips it in their own head. Yes. And because they've done the work of unzipping it, they feel ownership over the stuff. There's another kind of mantra of mine, or a sort of a totemic idea, a symbol of the sort of stuff I'd like to do, is that there's a comedian called Hannibal Buress who has a joke about, if you're cross with a taxi driver, when you get out, don't slam the door, leave the door open. And then they'll have to get out and run around, and then you can open their door and you can run around the car and wind them up. I think of that joke. It's a lovely joke. I think of that joke every single time I get out of a cab. So that makes me think, if I can write a joke about recycling or, ocean acidification, or turning the tap off when you brush your teeth in between brushes, if I can make a joke about that that's as sticky and memorable as that taxi joke, that could have a real world effect. And then the wider mission is, if I can get that joke in front of the CEO of a company. I've got a bit that I did on Live at the Apollo, big TV show here in the UK, which was about business class travel being 3 times worse for emissions than economy class. If I can get that joke in front of the person whose job it is to sign off on all the business class travel, that could make a real world difference. So I feel like there's this enormous opportunity to use comedy to try and actually affect some change.
Well, it'd be nice if you could
whilst having a laugh. Yeah, that sounded very sort of headmastery there.
Well, it'd be nice if you could do it. Feel free to do a couple of gags here. The stage is yours, Stuart. I particularly liked your gag about first class travel, because I think that was the one that you did at the Apollo, which has been on TV a couple of times, I think, hasn't it? Yes,
that's right. It was repeated recently. If people missed it, they can go to my website, which is climatecomedian.com. And that'll take you to a page on my website where there's a little clip of that, which I have illegally uploaded, having stolen it from the BBC on the basis that I wrote and performed every word of it, and I feel I should co-share the copyright. But we'll see how long I get away with it.
Right. Well, any other gags that you wish to perform on Metaconscious Leaders, you are very welcome to. This is a thought that I had, because I hear all the time about companies, we're going to have net zero by 2050. Net zero by 2050, and you're thinking, well, that's a long way away. And then you look at all the progress that's being made and all the postponements have been made, and but we've still got time. And it occurs to me that 2049 is going to be the most incredible year in the entire history of the universe, because everything is going to happen in that year. And I'm just thinking to myself, with the help of AI, couldn't we possibly take 2049, copy and paste it back to 2029? And
Sure.
then we would be able to have a whole lot of the things that we're losing in the meantime.
Yes, I think. Well, of course, I think that's very funny. My feeling is that 2049, we're going to see an unprecedented wave of people moving on from their jobs, so that they're no longer holding the hot potato when 2050 comes around, and they're supposed to deliver on all the promises. Of course, it's really scary. I think net zero is interesting because that's one of those things that I try to, or I have tried in the past, to communicate to an audience. A lot of my audiences don't really have a clear understanding of what net zero means. A joke I've used in the past for a big renewables company was that, what did I say? It was like, net zero It's basically, it means not zero. It means everything we can possibly do, apart from the other stuff that we can't do, but don't ask about that. Just ignore that. It's a little bit like saying, Imodium, that anti-diarrhea medication.
Yeah.
I said, there is net zero Imodium in this room right now. There's almost none. There's not none, but any Imodium that is in this room absolutely has to be here. But what's another bit that I'm working on at the moment? There might be something about, one of the things, so you'll know about the significance of 1.5 as,
Yes.
as we try to stick to 1.5 as a global average temperature increase since pre-industrial times. I'm working on a new bit at the moment about how I think climate people have communicated that badly, because so many people hear that 1.5 and they think 20 degrees today, 21.5 tomorrow, fine. But they don't realize that it's unevenly distributed over the whole of the world and all of the sea and all of the ocean and all of the seasons. So I say because it's unevenly distributed, it's the equivalent of me cooking a sausage on the barbecue. And my wife says, "Is it done yet?" And the honest answer is, some of it is done yet. Some of it will never be done. And some of it is ablaze. And those, so it's just an attempt to kind of explain concepts in a slightly frothier, funnier way.
Yeah, because the reality of this climate change is, you and I, we're sitting here, we're talking, and we're talking about climate change and so forth, and it gets a bit warm and a bit wet at times and so forth. But really, our lives are carrying on pretty much as normal. And
yes,
the reality is, though, in many parts of the world, it is already an unfolding catastrophe.
Absolutely. There are 5 fewer Solomon Islands now. There are already fewer Solomon Islands in the Solomon Islands. There's fewer of them,
and so
it's definitely happening.
Yeah, and so your challenge is actually bringing this into awareness, or building the awareness around it, keeping it light, but also settling in there the really profound, serious issue.
And yes, it is. And this is, listen, I'm not going to pretend this is easy. I've got enough good jokes and enough charisma that I can pull a gig off. Do you know what I mean? I've been doing this I've been doing comedy for 20 years and climate comedy for 3 and a bit. And I can make people laugh about the stuff, but I'm constantly checking myself, saying, is this right? Is this coming across in the right way? Could this be misconstrued? When I did Live at the Apollo, it was a performance unlike any other. I mean, I've played bigger rooms than the Apollo, but to do it on TV, I felt like I was following my own musical notation, because I was so keen to imply everything I wanted to imply, not imply anything I didn't want to imply. I did some material about Extinction Rebellion, who was sort of active at the time I was writing the stuff. And, I wanted to make it clear, in order not to alienate a mainstream audience, I felt a position I wanted to take on Extinction Rebellion was, I'm not a member of one of these activist groups, but isn't it interesting how they do X, Y, Z in a way that's not dissimilar to the suffragettes, which did work? Do you know what I mean? I wanted to stand to the side of it and kind of promote it, but without doing so in a way that would allow people to go, don't need to listen to this, he's one of them. So there are so many decisions like that to be made. You maybe know more about this than me, but something I'm trying to write about at the moment is artificial intelligence, or so-called artificial intelligence, and how that's changing and reshaping things. We know there are lots and lots of climate impacts in terms of energy and water cost, but AI can also help with the climate crisis, according to AI. And for me, it's such a complex topic. And the message, I haven't worked out what my message is yet. I was looking at the costs, then we don't know the specifics. The AI companies don't share the specifics, but there's, I've heard figures like every prompt is 1/5 of a teaspoon of water. And, there's an energy equivalent cost as well. And I'm really interested in what's the next show of mine? Probably, I feel like 2026 is going to be the current show, and 2027 might be another show that might be more about water and AI, or it might be about heat. There's so much to talk about. But at the moment, it's a really good distillation of some of the challenges. What's my line on it? I found out that I worry about my AI use. I use it never for creativity, but I use it for administrative tasks, because I'm kind of working on my, expanding my business. And I love it. It's this incredible magic robot. Makes me feel like Tony Stark from the Avengers. Love it. I looked into the costs of it because I was concerned, and I found out that the costs are dwarfed by the costs of the energy impact of uploading a video of my comedy to the internet. So suddenly I'm like, this is quite complex territory. I've had a joke go viral several times, a specific joke, annoyingly not a climate joke, but That's part of the impetus to go write more about the climate. I've had a joke that's been probably seen over 30 million times online across platforms. If people want to see it, it's pinned to the top of @Stuart Goldsmith Comedy on Instagram. It's a funny joke, 37 seconds long, and it appeals to 4 different groups of the population. And so it's super viral. Really fascinating experience to see that happen and try and wonder why.
Right.
But that joke, if it's been seen by 30 million times, are those views my scope 3 emissions? I think they probably are. I've created something and put it online, and everyone watching it, the battery use, the energy required, the phones required to watch it on, that has an enormous impact. And that's almost like, okay, I do want to talk about that. I think it's fascinating. Can I work out what my attitude is to that? Can I simplify the language? Audiences don't know what scope 3 emissions are. Can I simplify the language to make, public audiences, I mean, in order to make a good point that's interesting, relatable to people, and first and foremost, really funny? So that's kind of where I'm at, just to give you some idea of like the big process of working out and chunking through the stuff. What am I going to say? Research it properly. What's my attitude? How can I make it relatable? And once I've got all that, then it's got to be the funniest joke in the set. Otherwise, what's the point? So yeah, that's I'll come back on the show in a year or two when I've got my great AI and water bit.
Okay, so what about some jokes about business and businesses' approach to climate or the environment? Like, I haven't got enough, or we got to keep growing, or all of these.
Yes, sure. Listen, I think it is counterproductive for me to sit and do bits of my act to you, but I do think that how I feel about business, again, I feel like I speak to some very positive business people who are trying to rein in the worst of the excesses. Business itself is not the bad guy, but business is often extremely extractive. I've got some friends who are into degrowth. I've got some friends who think that degrowth simply will not work. I've got some friends who think we should smash the fossil fuel companies to bits. I've got a lot of friends who think, no, we need them because who else can manage the infrastructure of building all of the offshore wind that we need? All of these are subjects that I'm trying to steep myself in. I'm trying to learn enough about them to say something that's actually a valuable contribution and not just a daft joke. So, I mean, you tell me, where do you think we're at with business? Do you have a sort of a proposed solution to where business needs to go? I was listening to Kate Rayworth of Donut Economics on a podcast, traveling back from a gig last night, and she seemed to make so much sense, but was being very sort of expertly grilled on, is any of this an electable thing, or is this just a pipe dream? So how do you feel?
Well, everything is interconnected. There is no solution in a sense, because every solution has multiple connections and impacts and consequences and so forth. My view is kind of in the heading, is in the title, metaconscious. Einstein said, we cannot solve a problem at the level of thinking that it was created. We have to go to another level. And so metaconscious is saying, do you know what, guys? We have existential issues at play here. What is happening, and what is a higher level of being as opposed to doing? So being the human being as opposed to the human doing. What does it look like if we raise our level of consciousness and really begin to assess what is the fundamental reality that is life? And so I have some fascinating people coming on from business, not from business, but all with perspectives that are of great value to leaders who are dealing with some really big issues. Because business is not separate from society. Indeed, business is not a thing. Business is a doing. It's a doing by people in society. And this idea that it's something, that it's a thing, I suppose, is slightly reinforced by the idea that we have limited companies, for instance, so it's a legal entity, and therefore it's something separate. Now, business is business. So if the company breaks the law, then that's the company breaking the law. But I'm not. I'm a good family guy, type of thing. Yeah. So it creates some insulation. But that's just appearance, and unless we actually perceive differently we will still act the same. And it will be like ESG is a lot of tick boxing rather than us really recognizing that it's not about ticking the box. It's about embodying a completely different understanding of what the nature of reality is and what our role and purpose is together on the planet and in the cosmos.
Yes. Can you turn that into something I can vote for? I like the sound of it, but I need something.
Is
there such a thing as concrete meta-consciousness?
Exactly. Or, this is where I couldn't float out any concrete ideas.
Yes, well, for sure. I think that makes me think of a lot of things. The way in which we talk about individual responsibility, whereas it's just business, and the things that people do because they end up shoehorned into, effectively either trapped in a job because they need the money because they've got a family, or trapped in a job because they're scared. That's probably even more powerful a driver, or contains the first one. And yet people work. I do a thing on stage where I solicit climate confessions from the audience, right? So daft little mundane things intended to disrupt the idea of the purity test that says you don't deserve a voice on the climate if you don't lead a perfectly carbon-free life. So I like getting silly, mundane. It's a nice way of kind of zhuzhing a room together.
Yeah.
And it's quite fun and sort of kind of thematic climate-wise. Every so often I will get someone in those people say things like, I used compostable nappies for my first child, and then for my second child I was like, I can't bear it again, I'll go disposable. That kind of thing. Every so often, someone coming to see the show, maybe a public show at the Edinburgh Festival, will say, I've got an environmental studies degree, but I work for an oil and gas company. And so there are people who are doing it right now who feel bad about it, but they're doing it because they've got responsibilities and it's a job that they were offered, and they, all of these understandable human things. And to them, and what I've started saying most recently when that comes up is I'll say something on the lines of, well, that's fine. I'm not here to judge anyone, but please, can you promise now not to continue doing that job for 20 years? And then when you resign, do a big mea culpa message on LinkedIn that says, well, now I've realized it was wrong because I feel like we've all seen enough of them.
A quote that came off Mother Teresa's wall: it's not the doing that counts. It's the love in the doing that counts. And so making a very clear distinction between action and meaning or purpose or sentiment. Let's say I fire someone and I'm angry. It's going to have one outcome. Now I fire someone and I'm calm, I'm compassionate, I'm firm, I'm clear, I'm all of those. Completely different outcome. Could even be a transformative outcome for everybody involved. So it's not simply what we do, it's how we do it. And that, I think, is the bit that gets lost in our mechanistic worldview, where everything is about what we do rather than who we are being and who we are, and something that's more intangible than the physical body that's walking around, or this head that's being carried around.
And a lot
of
it, and I think a lot of it is probably a problem of volume. I think even the nicest person in the world, by the time they're firing their 50th person, they're like, that week you've got to do a load of layoffs. I'm going to do this with love. Are you really? Is the last person you're going to be fired, that you fire, are they going to have the same experience as the first person that you fire? It's very, very difficult. And I agree that it is about giving. That's what I try to do. I think that there is so much love in laughter. There is so much forgiveness in laughter, not in all laughter. I think that I used to very naively think that I used to think we were the good guys. I used to think comedians are the good guys, and I'm using the word guy non-gendered. There's loads of brilliant female and non-binary comics out there as well. Millions and millions, more than ever, which is great. But I used to think we were the good guys. And now I've realized comedy itself, the act of, it's almost like what are you doing? Seinfeld says a joke is an attempt to jump between two cliffs, and the cliffs have to be just far enough apart that you only just make it. And it's a good analogy it's a good vocabulary for analyzing jokes. This joke didn't work because the cliffs are too close together. We all just stepped across in our understanding. This joke didn't work. You fell to your death. Has to be just the right amount of jeopardy. And I think that what I've come to realize over the last 10 years or so is that the act of building some cliffs and putting them the right distance apart and jumping over them is essentially amoral. not immoral, it's amoral. It doesn't have any moral standpoint.
Okay.
That's why you can have racist jokes that are funny. Often, an audience, you'll laugh because the cliffs were at the right distance, and then you'll go, God, I didn't want to laugh at that. And often I hear comedians who I would sort of describe as bad actors, really. Often they're also bad actors. But I would describe that often what you hear is, yes, but if you laughed, then I've got you. You're implicated. And I think, no, you're not. You're not implicated. This is some algebra. You've learned some algebra, or you've put some things together in the right order. It was surprising and yet satisfying to an idea of our sense of sense. But that doesn't mean we're complicit. It doesn't mean we agree with you. And it doesn't mean it's okay. So I hope, and I'm confident actually, that my jokes, my algebra is done with love because I want everyone to be okay. I want everyone to be happy. In fact, it's partly a failing on my part, a kind of an artistic, let's not say a failing, it's an artistic vulnerability on my part. Because I want everyone to be okay, I probably could take more risks than I take. I'm funnier when I'm meaner on stage. When there's a funny clash between me behaving and being a sort of a fundamentally, I think, nice person, and then a little kind of angry, a little spike will jump out, and they'll see me in a new light. That's often very, very funny. My director, brilliant comic called Deck Munro, he said to me something very painfully accurate recently. He said, "They're not here for a hug, Stu, even if you are." And I was like, oh God, I have to go and sit down on a bench for a while and reassess my life. But I hope to do it with love. If what I'm doing is trying to not to teach people about the climate, that's an element of it, but I'm not a teacher. I'm just trying to share my experience. I've got all these quotes from other comics because I've spoken to so many of them and they fill up my kind of comic encyclopedia. Laura Davis, Australian comic, now resident in the UK. Laura says a joke is like the comedian is taking a shard of themselves and holding it up to the light and saying, what about that? You too? Do you feel that as well? And that's what I aspire to. So it's not simply didactic. It's me saying, I'm overwhelmed with fear at this, but I can hold it up in a funny way that says, you too? And you can go, yeah, me too. And we laugh and we feel better.
Yeah. And also we make connections.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And when we make connections, then magic happens.
Yeah, for sure.
In all sorts of ways.
Making logical connections,
Exactly.
Finding an analogy in an expected way, and also making a physical connection it's no accident that comedy works best in basements, underground with low ceilings and wood or brick on the walls. Everyone's laughter compounds in on itself and we all think we're having an amazing time and we all have an amazing time. It's not to say every basement gig goes well, but those structures of comedy clubs that are set up in an ideal world to reflect the audience back to itself is to improve that connection.
Was a comedy store in Leicester Square still going when you came on the stage?
Yeah. I've played the Comedy Store many times. I love it. That's a real marker. That's a waypoint for comedians. When you get past at the Comedy Store and become a regular act for them, that's a huge day. When the manager comes backstage and shakes you by the hand and says, "Welcome to the family." That's big.
Is it still going? I've not been there for a very long time.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Are you an optimist or a pessimist?
I want to be an optimist, and that's half the battle. The battle is half won. I think that I'm a crisis person. So I'm always foreseeing things going wrong in order to try and fix them. So I don't know whether that makes me an optimist or a pessimist. I was in quite a serious car accident as a kid, and it sort of gave me very mild PTSD, I think, whereby if I cross the road, I imagine getting hit by a car so that it doesn't happen. I work this little magic spell on myself the whole time. That has benefits in all sorts of ways for my life. And as you can imagine, it's exhausting for me and the people I love who are around me.
Yes.
But I think that there's a thing in capoeira, which as a student in 2000, of course, I had a play with the capoeira, which is a sort of Brazilian martial art, which isn't a dance or a fight. We call it a game, a jogo. And in capoeira, they would say, I have negative, but I am positive. And I love that. That's how I feel. That really resonates with me. I have pessimism, but I am optimistic.
Yeah. And life actually, and the entire universe is in balance. There is positive, there is negative. You need one without the other, and you need light without darkness. Yeah. And so forth. So
I guess so, yeah.
So it's always present in some form or another, and there's simply a transfer that's happening between the two. Mm-hmm. What do you think would be a good title for this podcast?
Well, that's a good question. I'm obsessed with the idea that the problems are the material. I think that's, I don't know if that reads, it's not like a funny title, but that's the most meaningful title to me. That's the thing that I do. The problems are the material. I get problems, I turn them into material. So probably you could stick a lol on the end. You could even call it stick a lol on the end.
Well, I hope, Stuart, at some point, there is so much material I think that one can get into, because we spend time, and me and my guests, we spend time talking about some really quite lofty, serious metaphysical ideas and so forth. And there's just to have a comedian in the room who's giving it a lighter touch is a refreshing experience to have at times.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it. I think I love lofty conversations. Just as a comic, part of me is always thinking, is this going to fly on the Comedy Store Late Show on a Saturday night? So it's about taking the loftiness and putting it through the prism and welcoming everyone in.
Exactly. And the act of doing that brings in a whole lot more people who wouldn't have got the loftiness.
I hope so.
And so that hopefully that'll be something which we'll come on to in the future. Time is chasing us down. It's only an appearance. It's not real. But on this stage, we're bound by it. So if we can conclude with a couple of questions, how would you sum up 2025, and what thoughts would you leave us with to slide into 2026 with?
2025, the year it got harder than ever to stay optimistic. I think that, how would I sum up 2025? Have to remember to continue looking outward. When every temptation says, pull up the drawbridge, hunker down, protect you and your family and make sure you're okay. Every instinct says that. We have to remember to keep looking outwards and looking at our neighbors and offering something to our neighbors. Because it's never, I don't think I've had a scarier year politically in terms of geopolitics. When Trump re-seized the White House, and I was at a huge event in Arizona in February, in which lots and lots of sustainability professionals were walking around ashen because they knew that this was going to set all the progress back at a time when the progress needed to be massively accelerated. I don't think we can understate how important the current presidency is, like the size of the role that it plays and the knock-on effect it has all over the world. And it would be easy. My instinct is to run and hide and hunker down and look after my own, to prep, whether that be emotionally or by simply starting to grow mushrooms and bean sprouts in my cellar and just try and come up with some micro sort of farm. But we have to remember that prepping, from my perspective, from I hope a left-wing perspective, is less about hoarding guns and ammunitions and antibiotics, and it's more about maintaining networks with your neighbors and preparing for mutual aid and mutual support. So I hope that's what we see going into 2026.
That's lovely. My second question is, where can people find out about you and send you their invitations to join them for their Christmas party or their New Year warm-up gig that puts nature and the environment in the driving seat in 2026?
Or for 6 gigs on Earth Day, which I have to fill it and slide in between each other. People can find me on LinkedIn. Weirdly, that's one of the biggest from a business perspective. By comedian standards, I'm phenomenally active on LinkedIn. So look for Stuart Goldsmith, Climate Comedian on LinkedIn, or you can go to climatecomedian.com, which will redirect you to the website that serves everything. That's my podcast and my other non-climate shows and all of my climate stuff and a clip from Live at the Apollo and so on. And if you're a podcast fan, and I hope you are if you're listening to this, my show is called The Comedian's Comedian Podcast. Possibly by the time you hear this. Oh, no, I think it doesn't come out. Episode 500 comes out in January with a superb guest who's exactly the right choice for episode 500. But if you're interested in comedians from all over the world, comedians of every stripe and every ethnicity and every gender and every attitude on the very, very broad church of comedy and what we can learn from it, then I hope you dip into that, because every people often say, who's your favorite episode? And the truth is they are all my babies, and there's some nugget to be found in everyone.
And I can recommend it as well, Stuart, because I've seen a few of them and they are very, very good. So well
Thank
done.
you. Thanks very much.
Keep up the good work. And thank you very much. You've been a star. Thank you. I hope one day we can do this again. Thank you.
I'd love to.
And
I'd love
be
to.
well.
Thanks, Greg. You too. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's more light-hearted episode and approach to the challenges of our time. If you want to know more about Stuart and his work, you'll find the links in the show notes below. Please subscribe, follow, like us if you haven't already done so. This is very helpful as it enables us to reach a wider audience. Also, you can share this link with others and leave a comment. It's always really useful to know what you're thinking about as well. This is the last episode of 2025. Thank you for listening and watching this and other episodes. We, the team at Metaconscious Leaders, wish you a very happy Christmas, festive season, and a happy new year. I look forward to seeing you in a joy-filled 2026. Thank you again. Until next time, be well.